Welcome to Quality Matters, where we speak with experts across industries to see how their perspectives can inform our pursuit of high quality education for all students. I'm Shaka, and this is Caitlin, and we're happy to be your guides for this limited series.
Like you, Shaka and I are passionate about all students having access to a great education, and quality is a driving force behind our work. But what does quality really mean? In an era where parents can customize their child's education, this question is more important than ever.
During each session, we'll hear from leaders in education, technology, business, sports, and the arts. We hope to apply their insights to our pursuit of a great education in the K-12 space.
Join us on this journey to secure a great education for all children. This is Quality Matters. Today, we are at the Emerging Schools Conference in Cambridge, Massachusetts at Harvard University, and we're joined by Mike McShane, coming all the way from Ireland in last night, leaving this evening. Fortunately, we got to snag him for a couple quick questions. Mike is the Director of National Research at EdChoice and a former high school teacher, and very well versed in all things related to school programs and regulations. I think I saw publishing 12 books, author, co-author, editor, co-editor of about 12 books.
I think something like that.
Crazy. Don't know how you do that.
Don't know how many people have read them, but they've at least been published.
Sure. Well, a feat nonetheless. So we're really excited to have you today, and we're looking forward to chatting a little bit more about all things related to schools and education and what quality looks like in your work. I think to start us off, we might get going with the question, can you tell us a little bit about what right now program policy in the education world is getting you excited, is getting you going?
Well, I think what's getting me going at events like this one that we're at, anytime I get the chance to be with people that are building these new schools, and they all look different from one another. Some are micro schools, and some are like hybrid homeschools, and some are weird like mixes of the two. And some have like super progressive pedagogy, and it's very student-led and like Montessori-like, whatever. And some are like at the opposite end, and they're like classical, and it's the great books, and they're in Socratic seminars with one another. But just like the energy of these people is infectious, and it's so easy to like look out at the world and see just problems. I mean, there's no shortage of those. But to actually be around people that are like, no, we're trying to fix this. And it may just be our little corner of the garden that we're tending to or whatever, but they're so much fun to be around. They want to learn. They want to learn from each other. They're interested in, oh, what are they doing? How are they solving problems? So it's such an invigorating group of people to be with. So it's awesome to be at an event like this. And anytime those folks get together, I try to be there.
Yeah. I love that your optimism, it's infectious as well. It's contagious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you highlighted on something that Chuck and I talk about, which is that so much of the world and so much of what we read about or watch on the news or listen to on podcasts it's not always as encouraging as what we're actually seeing when we go out into the practice and go out into the field. So I'm grateful that you highlighted that right off the bat.
Mike,
go ahead.
No, well, I was going to ask. I mean, you are a former teacher.
Yeah.
Are there some models that you're seeing now that you think, oh, I wish that was around, that existed when I was in the classroom? Because it really resonates maybe with your own kind of personal ethos or your teaching style, et cetera.
I'm a sucker for classical education.
Okay.
I was an English teacher. I was like an English major in college. So I love books. I love reading. I love the great books. I love how literature can help people really wrestle with big ideas. I like schools that have that bigger vision, that are trying to say, no, we're trying to talk about like the big questions of like humanity and of like what it means to be a person and what it means to live in community and what good government is and these big things. And to me, talk about being infectious. I think that's like, yeah, this is what we go to schools for. Like, this is why we do all of this. And so I'm a sucker for those types of schools that say, no, we're going to have kids ask big questions, and we're going to read great thinkers, and we're going to engage with them, and we're going to say how these people were wrong or how these people were a product of their times, but we're going to really try and wrap our arms around like stuff that really matters. So that's stuff that really, I would have loved to have taught in one of those schools. I would have loved to have gone to one of those schools, but yeah, really exciting.
Okay, so I agree with you, but I'm still going to ask you a question, like press in on it a little
Yeah.
bit. And when I say I agree with you, I have the same kind of affinity. I love wrestling with those big questions. I think my wife probably gets annoyed by that a little bit. Let's like be a little bit more practical. What do you say to folks who say, "Hey, we don't need more classics majors, right? Or we don't need more, like, what are we going to do with all the English literature majors or what have you? Don't we need more people getting into hyper technical or really focused industries and occupations? And it might be nice to sit around and think about philosophy,
Yeah.
but at the end of the day, don't we really just need somebody who can like connect the Wi-Fi?
Yeah, I am like the 100% opposite of that view.
Okay.
In the sense that, like, I think with the growth of AI and the way technology is more automating things in our life and others, like what it means to be human and what separates ourselves from like an MLM, Chat GPT or whatever, is only going to become more important, not less
for
important.
sure.
Like narrow technical skills, think of all the like computer programming and things are done that's going to be automated by AI or is
Yeah.
possible to be automated by these things. But what's not going to be automated are these big questions like, what is the good life? Like, how are we to treat each other? Like, those things can't. And the only way to do that is, I think, to like wrestle with people who have thought about that before, and to put on. So I think we need more, because if we just have a lot of people with a great amount of technical training, but no kind of ethical or moral or historical or philosophical training, that to me is like a tube slide into dystopia.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. That's the name of the next book, by the way.
Tube slide into dystopia.
Yeah,
I
for
like
sure.
it. After we were just being so positive
Yeah,
about
I
all
don't
the
wanna
stuff that's
write it.
happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm curious, we talk a lot about quality
Totally.
and what it looks like, how it's defined.
Yeah.
When we think of those big picture questions, and those big picture thoughts, it's really hard to identify consistent quality for everybody. It's going to look different. Are there components of some of those big picture thoughts or practices that you've either had exposure to or that you've thought about yourself that inform your definition of quality?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's like, when I think about quality in schools, there's like means and there's ends. And it's important that we don't confuse the two with one another, but we can use some to help understand others. So like the end, if we really want to go deep in the whole like classical thing or whatever,
please.
is, what did the Greeks call it? Eudaimonia, like human flourishing. Like that's really what we're trying to do here, right? We're trying to help children grow, both actually flourish in and of themselves as children, but
Absolutely.
also as they grow. And if we think from the kind of classical thinkers, it's about being a virtuous person. It's about being courageous and prudent and temperate and like all of these things that I think are like so important, and again are probably in short supply as we look out at the world. But as you say, as someone who has like a PhD who tries to measure things, right? Measuring human flourishing is quite challenging.
Yeah.
Measuring, prudence or temperance or whatever, those sorts of things. So look, what do we need to do to be able to do that? Well, like obviously we need to be able to read. We need to be able to write. We need to be able to think. And I think we can point to some of those things when it comes to a quality school. There are some ways. But I think like another part of it that, again, is, I will be the first to admit, is fuzzy and is like hard to pin down. But when I look at schools, is about the culture. Like I think school culture is so important. And again, pedagogy can be like, the very progressive schools have a fantastic culture, and very kind of classical schools can have a fantastic culture, and both of those can have terrible cultures as well.
Right.
But a culture that is oriented towards bigger questions around the formation of children as human beings, and that have a kind of worldview, a philosophy of like what exactly that it is that they're trying to do there. To me, and adults in the building that can articulate that to us, that's when I start to say, like, if you wanted to point me to a quality school, go to a place where all the adults are kind of singing from the same hymn book of like, this is how we think children develop, and this is why we're acting the way that we're doing in order to get them there, and that the children are on some path and they're trying to figure out some way to get them there.
How do you think about parents being able to access some of that information? Because the way you describe it certainly makes sense for folks who are already, say, in the education space, in the
Yeah.
education kind of industry, if you will, like this policy space or the pedagogical space, folks who have a PhD and kind of know the questions to ask.
Sure.
But that's not 99.9% of the population. So are there questions or like maybe a quick sort of here are the three things that you would tell your friends, like, right? Like, what do you tell your friends who are not in the education space?
Totally.
Here are the things you need to be either out on the lookout for or ask your school about when you're trying to determine whether or not this is a good fit for your own child.
For sure.
Yeah.
That's a great question. I mean, I think, and it's funny because I just had to pick a school for my child. So,
Yeah.
as you mentioned, I live in Ireland. Ireland has basically universal school choice, so you can send your kid wherever you want to.
Wow.
We actually, especially at the primary level, we don't have public schools. They're actually, it's kind of a little known fact, but all the schools are private, but you are subsidized by the government to go to all of them. But there actually isn't a lot of information available about these schools. They don't take standardized tests, so you don't have anything to necessarily go off there. We do have a schools inspectorate, so they inspect schools, but like the school that my kid goes to, I think the most recent inspection report was from like 2011 or something.
Wow.
So we didn't really actually have a lot of information to go off. So I was in this very issue, and me as a kind of immigrant to a country that didn't necessarily know the system as well. I'm lucky my wife's a teacher and she's really the brains of the operation, so put her in charge of things. But yeah, so as an immigrant to a system who's not necessarily familiar with it, who doesn't have good data at hand, I felt certainly a great deal of empathy for people in America who are tasked with this very topic. And it made me think about it. And to me, what I did, and something I think that we should probably build on more, was just the degree to which it was sort of social interactions with people. I would be walking around with my daughter, and Ireland is a very friendly place. I wish more people lived in places that were friendly like that. But when they would see like the kind of age of my daughter, they'd be like, oh, has she started school yet? I'm like, oh no, we're going next year. We're kind of deciding, do you know, where'd your kids go to school? Whatever, we talked to neighbors, we talked to friends, we talked to people that were there. Like, wait, where did your kids go to school? Or where are they in school now? Or what have you heard about whatever? And sort of through that, I was able to gather pictures of what these schools were like. And what was interesting is you're able to do it in kind of shades of gray, because like my friends that are maybe, or my wife's friends or family members, whatever, that are on the more kind of like hippy dippy end of the scale, I don't necessarily judge their, like if they say, like a school's like too disciplined, I was like, well, it may actually be a mark in its favor, or you know what I mean?
Sure.
Right,
So
right.
you're able to, I always thought of it was like when I read restaurant reviews, like here in Boston, right? I'm from Kansas City originally, but like when I used to read Yelp reviews, I'd come to Boston and be like, okay, I got to get dinner somewhere. I'll just like pull it up on there. I like immediately added a star, because it was like Boston people were like so much more critical of like whatever, and they were just much more likely to do it. So I was like, oh, if that's 3-star, like that's a Kansas City 4-star, and I'd go there and it's fine, because I was able to say, oh wow, like these people knocked it for stuff I don't care about,
Yeah.
like
Sure.
whatever. So when you're doing that sort of socially, and you're talking with people, and it's in the grocery checkout line, or it's on the side of the soccer pitch, or whatever's happening, you're able to actually kind of construct and take all those different pieces and decide sort of what fits for you. But when it comes to the actual school itself, I think the opportunity to try and, honestly, like a huge part of it is like how on the ball is the school, like when you talk to them. Like if you send them an email asking them a question, like do they get back to you pretty quickly?
responsive?
Are they responsive? Are they open? Are they,
Yeah.
like if they show up and say like, yeah, come check out the school and see, and then when you're in that school, if you have the chance to be in that school, talking to the adults, like I think most people have a good idea, like, do these folks seem like they have their act together? Do they seem like they have a plan?
Yeah.
Does it seem chaotic in this place, or does it seem purposeful? Again, do they have this kind of vision of what they're trying to do? Do they talk about the steps that they're taking to get there? So a lot of this is very, again, I say as a social scientist, it's very fuzzy, and it's very context dependent and person dependent. But I have to be honest, like I have to be honest with the way I did it. And I have to be honest with, I think, the way lots of people do. Yeah.
So I'm curious, and I have to ask, I feel like so many people right now in the world of education have this hyper fixation on metrics of accountability and how that equates to quality. And depending on how things are measured and what the test scores are and what the um, all of those scores.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
all
yeah.
scores.
Yeah.
It's scores related.
Yeah, usually
And that's
academic related stuff.
academic related, and that's a direct feeder to someone's impression of the quality of an
Totally.
institution. It sounds like that experience and the accountability system in place is different.
Yeah.
What
And
does
I
that
think,
look like?
well, I think it's like, I think there's a couple problems with sort of that. And part of it is, again, like we talked about earlier, confusing means with ends.
Totally.
Which is to say, like, well, this is interesting and useful information.
Right.
Like, I'm not a person who's like against standardized testing or that we shouldn't do that. And people
Yeah.
should have that information. That's good. But we don't want to, I mean, pick your metaphor. We don't want to lose the forest for the trees. We don't want the tail to wag
Absolutely.
the dogs and like that sort of thing. But I think it's also like, again, this kind of bigger picture of like, okay, well, like what are we going towards? Now,
Yeah, what are we trying to
What are we
achieve?
trying to do? And I think one of the things that got lost in a lot of this conversation is about fit. We wanted to come to this thing of like, these are good schools and these are bad schools. And you want
Yeah.
to send your kid to the good school and not to the bad school.
So that your kid goes to the good school and then becomes the good kid. Or
Yeah,
whatever
for
it
sure.
is.
And then it's like, well, what we actually need is to match students with schools because there are,
Absolutely.
even when we got test score results or graduation rates or others, they're averages. And we all know that around every average is a bell curve. And your kid might be on the right side of the bell curve or the left side of the bell curve. And it could be, wow, like this is an awesome. I mean, there are probably people who come, I mean, to this august institution and have a terrible time. And it's like,
Sure.
oh, well, maybe like they should have gone somewhere else. But it's like, no, but like this is the best school. But it's like the best school for whom, doing what?
And what purpose?
Yeah.
Purpose.
Yeah.
So I think that like the more we can move maybe away from trying to make these like this is a good school, this is a bad school, this is the right school, wrong school,
Yeah.
and think about these things about fit, about how does that fit what the student needs and what the family wants and all of those things. That to me is a much more productive conversation. And to be clear, there are probably going to be schools that will be a poor fit for everyone.
Yeah.
Because they're like bad at what they do and it's like no one wants to go there. And there
Right,
may be schools
unfortunately.
that are great because they find a way to be a fit for lots and lots of kids. And so I'm not completely agnostic to these questions or saying like, oh, like they're all basically the same, that's whatever. But I think there's a lot more in the kind of meat of that bell curve where we want to try and match like, oh yeah, like that school would be awesome, but maybe not for my kid.
Yeah.
Or that might be awesome for somebody else. And that's great. And we want them to be able to operate and for the people that school works for to choose that school and to thrive. And that's awesome. And then we also want other opportunities available for other people to find the schools where their kids are going to thrive.
Yeah. So when you think about, I'm thinking about this curve and I'm thinking about educators in particular, and even policymakers. And it seems to me that oftentimes when people think, oh, I want to get into teaching, or I'm a lawmaker and I want to pass a law because I really care about education. My experience has been when lawmakers think that, they don't think I'm a lawmaker and I want to pass a law because I care about education because I want the schools right in the middle of the bell curve. I want the most average schools to remain average, right? I just haven't heard that.
Sure.
Maybe they don't say it out loud. I don't know.
Sure.
You often, probably more typical is the case that they're thinking about schools that are on, if you think about the left end of that bell
Totally.
curve, right? They're thinking about those schools that, man, where the academic results seem really poor, where where maybe there's just other, behavioral indicators at the school, right? With the super high suspension rates or what have you, a high teacher turnover. And they're like, what are we going to do about these schools over here, right? What do you think about that? Like, what are some good options? How does this emerging schools model space, does it play a part in how we remedy some of the schools that I want to say objectively, I don't know if that's the right word, but objectively we look at, and most people look at it and they go, man, that school's just not getting it done.
Yeah.
And they're not getting it done for hardly anybody in
Yeah.
the community. What do we do about that? And what's a fix?
Totally. I mean, I think that, under any sort of curve, right? even if we were to get way better than we are right now, there's still always going to be, sort of axiomatically, there'll always be a bottom 5% or
Sure.
bottom 10% or
Sure.
whatever. And I think that we have to be honest about so many of the things that happen outside of school and the things that students bring into schools that schools do not necessarily have like an unlimited ability to solve.
Right.
Right. And I think that part of a mistake, I think that the education reform movement made over the course of the last maybe 20 or 25 years was, while it's very good to say schools are not doing as well as they could be, they should be doing much better, to sort of say that like schools can solve all of society's ills is just like not true.
Yeah.
Like it's just
Not
not it's
practical.
not practical. And you want to talk about a way to alienate teachers.
Right.
People are like, hey, listen, guys, like we're not miracle workers.
That's right.
We're doing everything we can to do better. So I think the sad reality is that there's always going to be schools that are struggling, because we're always going to have communities that are struggling. We're always going to have kids that are struggling. We're going to have families that are struggling. And it's very difficult to design a system that can fix that.
Sure.
Right? Like there's like a broader societal thing that's happening.
Yeah.
Now, what I do think though, and I think this is where, if we could be more thoughtful around some of the accountability things and others, I think accountability and test scores and all of those things are a blunt tool. But sometimes blunt tools work.
Yeah.
And if we're talking about the very lowest end of the performance spectrum, if we're just trying to say, hey, listen, we're just trying to pick the bottom 5%. We're not trying to figure out how to get that median school to be 25% better. We are just trying to pick who is absolutely failing at everything that they're doing. That's a problem that numbers can help fix, right? So, and I think, look, there was Doug Harris down at Tulane did a book years ago, or in a paper years ago, talked about it with like teacher evaluation and others, which is like, what if instead of trying to like find the right value added model that can capture every teacher, what if we just said, hey, all we're trying to do is find like the bottom 5 or 10%, which then we would like intervene, right? So for me, I think of even like an inspector model or others, which is like, hey, we give all these kids tests, we see it, we can identify that bottom portion of students, and then people can come in and observe that school. And maybe what we're seeing is they're just bad at what they're doing. And that's when we need to say we're not going to fund them anymore. We need to put them on some sort of remediation plan or something like that. Or it could be, hey, look, we're actually seeing something happening that's on the outside, that the school is actually doing well, or they have new leadership. We need to give them more time. Well, we can sort of mix the objective with the subjective to identify schools, to try and figure out why and figure out what to do with it. But I think when we tried to go too far on one side, we get into problems. And when we try and go too far on the other side, like we don't want to say it's entirely subjective, but we also don't want to say it's entirely objective. If we can use the objective statistics to inform the subjective judgments, I think that's where like the real money is.
So I'm curious, you've had a lot of experience over the last couple of years in this world, and that must position you well to sort of make projections moving forward a little bit. Although I'd like you to be a future reader, that I don't know that we can expect that. What would you say is you're most looking forward to, or you think is going to sort of start creating some real shifting and some real positive impact as we move forward for the next 2 to 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and we know from like the polling that we do at EdChoice and others, when I think of these new models and the people that are here today, I keep thinking about sort of push factors and pull factors, right? So we have the push factors of like what's going on in existing schools that people are not super excited about. And I was just literally just watching the news this morning. I don't know if any of y'all watch the news. It's not going to be necessarily timely whenever this comes out, but I happen to be watching the Boston news in the morning because it was funny. But there was like this story of like a horrible fight at a high school here that was caught on camera, and a teacher got hurt or whatever. And there was another story. It seemed like a horrible story of like a student with special needs was left on a bus for like 4 hours, and their mother had to like run up the aisles of buses to figure out where they're. So as long as things like that are happening, and again, that's at the most extreme end, and at others, as long as schools are still coping with chronic absenteeism and others, we're going to be still seeing push factors. Folks saying, we want more options. This ain't working. We need to do something else. But maybe the more exciting thing, the more positive thing is the pull factors, which is the way these new models are trying to say, parents, what problems do you have that we can solve? It's like, hey, like the schedule doesn't work for us. Okay, like we can solve
Right.
that problem. Like
Sure.
let's come up with a new schedule for it. Or the calendar doesn't work, or the pedagogy doesn't work. Or parents are like, man, these kids have way too much technology. We need less technology. Like, okay, we can solve that problem.
So
Or parents are like, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt,
Oh, yeah.
but parents can say we're living in a technology future, so we need more technology. And so those sorts of things, I think that's exciting.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, having conversations and sort of having conversations with the constituents and the people being served and serviced, the students, the parents, and then taking what they have to say and then actually making the changes that are necessary in order to listen and solve for what the problems they're expressing are.
Totally. And I think we're going to see more examples, is the optimist in me. We're going to see more examples across all sectors, traditional public schools, charter schools, private schools, homeschooling, and others, where people are going to thrive when they do that. Like traditional public school superintendents and principals that have, like, let's say, a large homeschooling community in their area, saying, like, hey, why don't you all come into the auditorium and say, we're not enemies with one another. I'm not, we're not afraid of you. We don't think whatever. How can we help each other?
Yeah.
Like we have a football team and we put on plays and we have a band. Maybe would your kids like to participate in that? Or like, hey, we have like chemistry labs and shop class. Would you maybe okay, let's find some way to like work together and say, we'll kind of blur these lines between like our students and your students, and like we'll collaborate. And I feel like some people are already doing that and they're going to meet with success. And I just think more and more that's where success is going to happen, where people say, hey, listen, if we just snipe at each other constantly, we're just going to be, robbing from the same pie.
Yeah.
But if we
Totally.
think about how we can collaborate and each kind of get our own slices of it, it's all good.
Yeah.
We're all on the same team.
Yeah. Mike, I think that's a good place to end. On this note of collaboration, I am really encouraged. I'm always encouraged when you and I connect and chat because you're such an optimist. I think it's a really optimistic time, right?
Yeah.
The idea that as compared to 10, 20 years ago, that you do have the ability, and educators have the ability, school leaders have the ability, maybe with fewer constraints, to look across the city and say, what's working well over there? Can we partner? Can we do this together, work on behalf of kids? And by the way, we don't have to do all things all the time, right? Because that's
For sure.
We just know that has never worked. It's never going to work. So I think we're moving into a really exciting time. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I really
this was
enjoyed this.
wonderful.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Exciting conversation at an exciting conference.
Yeah, right on.
All right, safe travels back to Ireland.
Thank you.
All right, Caitlin, so we just heard from Mike McShane, and now we're going to break down that conversation. What's something that struck you, really stood out?
I mean, it's honestly hard to choose just one. I found so much of his conversation to be interesting, fascinating, and encouraging.
Yeah.
Which is like the trifecta. One of the things that stuck out to me in particular was this idea that he spoke about means and ends, means to an end, and it reminded me of the episode with Eric and Ben, where they talked about input and output. Specifically in their conversation, it was, what does the quality of input look like, and does it guarantee you a quality in output? Not always. In this case, understanding high quality education opportunities, education systems, and the different components. What are the means to getting that end result that you're hoping for? Of course, we had his international perspective, but I think even in our experiences with schools, school systems, school ideologies in the States, there's a lot to unpack and understand there.
Yeah, the phrase that I jotted down, and you can tell just how sharp Mike is, because he came up with this, said it on the fly. I don't know, maybe he's used this phrase before, but he said he wondered whether or not we can have a system that uses objective measurement to inform subjective judgment.
Yeah.
And I thought that's so good. Can we have objective measurement to inform subjective judgment, so that you're getting this mixture of quantitative data. What are the reading levels? What are the academic levels? What's math proficiency? What's suspension rates, etc. And you're also getting subjective judgments. And that is, parents, certain parents care about STEM
Yes.
more than they do, say, classical education, or they care more about extracurriculars than, another family. And marrying those two things, I think, is hugely important. Um, and by the way, strikes me that, well, yeah, of course, in a massive school district, that would be really hard to do,
Right.
right? So how do you do this on a almost like not micro schools per se, but how do you do it on a smaller scale?
Sure.
That seems to
Sure.
be the right size.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's interesting. All of what you just said has reminded me of this idea that I would love to ask him about at another time. How does innovation play into all of
Mm.
this? He spoke a lot about the focus on the classics and traditional big picture thinking, historical references and historical influences into
Mm-hmm.
where we are
Mm-hmm.
today. We've gotten from where we were then to where we are today with innovation and new ways of thinking, emerging models for different schools. What is that going to look like as it takes us into the future? And how do we merge innovation with reality
Mm-hmm.
and then also with accountability?
Mm-hmm.
Accountability is such a buzzword these days. I thought Mike did a great job of sort of painting a picture of realistic accountability measures and um, effective accountability measures, because I don't know that the ones we have today necessarily are.
Yeah.
But I would be so curious what he would say. I'd actually be curious what your thoughts are as we move forward and merging innovation, reality, for all the reasons you just mentioned, and accountability. We have to measure, there has to be some type of feedback loop
Yeah.
for either encouraging or reinforcing that what the changes we're making are actually being effective
Yeah.
or not.
Yeah. Well, it strikes me that one of the nice things that's happening, and I would call this, he referred to push factors and pull factors.
Mm.
This, I think, is like some of the pull factors of having now schools that are being started by teachers,
Mm-hmm.
schools that are being started by teachers or school leaders in conjunction with lots of parent input and feedback, right? The more you have, now you get you have this laboratory basically, and I don't mean to say that we're just playing fast and loose with our children. We still
Right.
care deeply, of course, about what's happening in
For sure.
classrooms, but it stands to reason that when you roll out a system in a school district of 50,000 kids or 100,000 kids or more,
Yeah.
right? You're looking for standardization,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and that's a big ship. And so if you don't get it right, well, it takes a lot of effort just to turn that ship even just a little bit and do
Mm-hmm.
something different. Whereas now we've got so many of these different little models kind of popping up.
Yeah.
Let's see what's working, right?
Totally.
And it sounds like that's what Mike's talking about a little bit. Like, let's see which school is being really responsive,
Mm-hmm.
or more or less responsive. Which one is a better or worse fit for certain types of students or students with certain values.
Yeah.
So I do think the multitude of options, it presents the chance anyway that we will hit upon an accountability system that makes more sense.
Yeah, I agree. And the only thing I would add to that is this idea that he talked about of having conversations with people as one of the leading forms of accountability
Yeah.
and of feedback.
Yeah.
What is it that you're interested in? What's not working for you? What's not working for your student? How can we take that input? How can we take those conversations or that feedback, we as schools and teachers and educators and school systems and politicians, to make the changes
Yeah.
necessary to meet the needs
Yeah.
of the students and of those parents and of those communities.
It something that he mentioned, I want to come back to. He was talking about that sort of like getting community input.
Mm-hmm.
And so how did he go about finding a school for his child? And he said, well, I asked people around him,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
He is originally from Kansas City. He's now moved to Ireland. He lives there with his family, and he didn't know much about the system. So he's just getting
Information.
data points from people.
Totally.
That is such a good reminder, because I don't know about you, but I think about even how I made decisions, say about college or grad school, right? I think the prevailing wisdom for a lot of people is you go to U.S. News and World Report
Yeah.
and you say, well, what's the highest
Ranked.
what's the highest ranking school that will accept me
Yeah, right.
and go
And
there.
that's the one I want.
And that's the one I want. And that is not a great way to ensure fit.
Yeah.
And so two things came out: fit, but also getting some input from people who's maybe have similar values, or whose judgment you can at least put through your own kind of
Yeah.
filter, right?
You know, I'd be curious for the audience and the people listening, what have been different areas in their lives or places in their lives when they where they have sort of felt like they've been put into a box
Yeah,
due to a ranking or due to an accountability system that didn't necessarily incorporate fit.
sure.
And was it, professionally, or was it academically? And where might we all be able to start challenging those places and
Yeah.
actually start including fit as a consideration
Yeah.
in next steps and in wants and in needs?
Yeah. Well, and I know that there are a lot of education technologists, we'll call them, that would love to come up with a system that says by 8 years old, hey, here are the things you're good at. You
Yeah.
should be a this. But that's I personally think that's pretty ridiculous.
For sure.
I think, man, if you would have asked me that when I was that age, like, who knows? I think I would have said, oh, I want to be a doctor. Because I just
Yeah.
thought that was like the coolest thing that you could be. And then it turns out, when I took an anatomy class, I was like, oh, I hate this. Right. And so we've got to have space for people to evaluate their own values.
Right. And push back on some of those
and,
systems.
and push back, right? And to say, hey, I'm glad that this is ranked really high.
Yeah.
The school is ranked really high, but it may not work best for me. I may not thrive here.
Yeah. And again, it's just bringing me right back to the conversation we had with Dr. Ashley Berner. We need everybody.
Yeah.
And so if we're
Yes.
creating this false narrative that some grouping of people, some grouping of students, some grouping of schools is tremendously or far outweighs anyone else, we're not going to get very far.
Yeah.
We need everybody. We need all these different schools. We need all these different school models.
Yeah.
We need the competition that they create. We need the encouragement and also the new innovation that they're pushing in different directions. And I loved his perspective, again, not only because it was international and expansive, but because he's referencing all of his years of research and all of his different expertise areas pertaining to school policy and school programs.
Well, something that's especially interesting is that, Mike works for EdChoice, and that is an organization that cares deeply about market forces, sort of the free market. It is formerly known as the Friedman Foundation, after Milton Friedman. So they care a lot about free market economics. Mike is remarkably intentional. So you can have both, meaning free market doesn't just mean completely laissez-faire, hands off, where just do whatever. And I think that came through. He has some things he really cares about, both personally and when evaluating policy and kind of the education policy landscape. So I think that was good for me to hear as well.
A good
that
reminder.
This isn't just, hey, do whatever and we'll just be satisfied with it.
Yeah.
Because it's not just about the activity. He does care about outcomes, and that really came through.
Right. I'm sure he would have, similar to the quote you wrote down, I'm sure he would have a very targeted one-liner about this idea, this dichotomy of being very focused on lots of different opportunities, lots of different options, the need to meet the needs of other people, whatever their needs look like. And then also being very explicit with how you're going to do all of those things and how you're going to measure the means, the inputs and the outputs of those different institutions and those different ways of thinking.
Did you know, because it was news to me, I did not know that primary schools in Ireland are all effectively private schools.
No.
That was news to me.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I'm excited to look more into that and to better understand what that actually looks like and how that system works.
Yeah.
That was Interesting
Yeah,
tidbit of information that he shared.
fascinating, and I want to learn more about how many children we're talking about and
Yeah.
how long that system's been in place, maybe forever. Um, I wonder what it would take to get to uh, that space. It sounds like he's pretty pleased with it, and he's someone whose opinion I would take pretty seriously.
For sure.
But that's just a really interesting model that I didn't know much about.
I would be really curious to see what other people's thoughts are when imagining our country heading in that direction.
Yeah.
I think we'd have really well-informed people who say we're absolutely not ready. That's not a possibility for us. And I think we'd have other people that say, heck yeah, let's try and get there as fast as we can, where there's opportunities for people. So I'd be curious, the people listening, what their thoughts are on every aspect of what that world would look like.
Yeah, well, maybe that's something that folks can leave in the comments, so they can, put online. Let us know what you think about that. What does it look like to get to an Irish system?
Yeah.
And should we even,
Attempt it.
attempt it? Should we even orient ourselves in that direction?
I don't know, but I imagine those comments will be lively.
Fire. All right. Thanks, Caitlin.
All right,
Always good to
thanks,
talk.
Shaka.
Yeah.
See you later.